Welcome to section 4 of curriculum planning in early childhood education. So far we've done some reviewing. We talked about theories, which we've talked about before in our introduction to child development class. And we, of course, as we always do, have emphasized the importance of play and intentional teaching, creating play opportunities that lead to learning, not just playing, but creating opportunities through play. We've talked about the cycle of curriculum and once again, back to play, developing curriculum that is based around play. In section 3, we learned about how important the environment is in curriculum, whether that be the materials provided in the environment, that they be materials that instigate learning through play, or the way an environment is set up that is conducive to positive behavior. Recognizing any problem areas in an environment that can lead to bad behavior and really focusing, not bad behavior, sorry, that's not the right word for it, but have negative effects on behavior sometimes. And we especially talked about the daily schedule and keeping in routines and how important that is for positive behavior. So now we're to section 4, which, as you can see looking here, really dives into all the different learning domains. So, we've got our social emotional, our cognitive, and our physical, but each of those can be broken down more. And so we're going to focus on each of those. But before we even get to chapter 7, we've got this 10-page intro here to planning curriculum for the different domains. So we're going to take a look at that. I lean forward. There we go. Okay, so at the start of this intro, I'll keep wanting to call it a chapter, but at the start of this intro, which is on page 139, we go through what preschoolers look like, which we've done before. We've done all kinds of development. We've looked in other classes at developmental charts and just expectations of different ages. Of course, we know that there are going to be children who are outliers on one side or the other of any expectations, and we want to make sure that we're meeting all of their needs. So I'll give you a chance on your own to read about Anaya and Tanner and Isabella and Mateo and what they are like at 2, 3, 4, and 5. So part of knowing what a typical preschooler, and this section does focus on preschool. When we get to the end, we will talk some or learn some about infants and toddlers and school age, but the bulk of these chapters focuses on preschool because that kind of hits right in the middle and is, we're more cognitive. Well, I wouldn't say more cognitive development, but just where more of the learning planning is going on. Of course, we're providing infants and toddlers with activities as well, but they're getting more into it by the time they're at the top at the preschool age. So that is what these chapters focus on. So these few pages get into, well, I'll just tell you here, guidelines, framework, and the desired results development profile. Okay, so your chapter or your book wants to focus on California expectations and frameworks and things like that because it was written by California authors. So I've gone in and I've changed some things, but some of them still relate. Even the California information relates to us. So as you read these, just keep that in mind. But I'm just going to read this right here. The following 6 chapters on planning curriculum for preschools have been compiled using the California Preschool Foundations and the Preschool Curriculum Framework. These well-researched documents published by the California Department of Education can be used along with the desired results developmental profile to support implementing the curriculum planning process with young children. So then I've given you information, whereas in California, they have foundations. We have the early learning guidelines in the state of Oklahoma. And for preschoolers, we do. And so I'll just click on this and we'll take a look at the early learning guidelines. Hopefully you are somewhat familiar with, but this is that document. And you'll see that it's broken down into concept areas, um, approaches to learning. We want to develop lifelong learners, right? So we want to focus, one of our focuses has to be on the way they approach learning and fostering that desire to learn. So we've got creative skills, language arts, mathematics, health, safety, and physical development, science, social and personal skills, and social studies. And so if you keep reading, actually, I'm going to pause here. I do encourage you to read this. It's really not that long. It's pages 1, 2, and 3. But I mean, it really gives you just a great background on the thought process of these standards, how to use them. And I call them standards. They are guidelines at this age. To me, the difference is that, so by the time we get to school age, we call them the Oklahoma Academic Standards. And, there's a push for sure to make sure that each standard is met by the end of a school year. Guidelines to me is a little softer word than standard. The guidelines are what we hope children are able to accomplish to, and be learned. It's not even accomplished. I think that's the difference. It's guidelines are more, here's what they should be learning about. Here's some areas to work on. Here's some ideas of things that are good for their development. Whereas standards seem harsher of, hey, you need to hit these marks. So these are our guidelines. And so if this is your first time looking at them, here's approaches to learning. And there's only one standard in the approaches to learning, and that is that the child demonstrates positive attitudes, habits, and learning styles. Then each standard is broken down. An indicator of progress in standard 1 would be that they demonstrated eagerness and interest in learning. Here's some examples of things you might see, and here are some strategies or activities that you could do to foster this. Another indicator is B, develops and expands listening skills. And then examples of how you might see that and activities that you as a teacher might do. So they just keep going on. And then there are quite a few, even though there's just one standard. And then we get into creative skills. An explanation of creative skills, standard 1, indicators, strategy. For creative skills, there's still just one. When we get into language arts, there is more than one standard, again, each broken down. So standard 1 is listening. The child listens for information and for pleasure. An example would be listens with interest to stories read aloud. Understands and follows oral direction. And then standard 2 is about speaking. Standard 3, print awareness. So these are all things that we're hoping that we work with preschoolers while they're in our care. So I'm going to go back to the textbook. So California has foundations, is what they call similar to our early learning guidelines. And then they have curriculum framework, which really is more in depth than what you just saw, but it's really ideas for how teachers can help meet these guidelines. But you'll notice that on our guidelines, we had that whole column of ideas for you. If you are teaching pre-K through any grade above that, Oklahoma does have these frameworks that have lots and lots of ideas for ways to meet each of the Oklahoma academic standards that we talked about. So if you are pre-K or above or ever are, I really encourage you to look at the frameworks. Teachers from across the state go into a lot of detail and planning on helping teachers know exactly what each standard means and providing ideas of how to meet that standard. And I know that for a fact because I actually served on that team a couple years ago for English language arts. So I know what goes into it, and I know that there are some great ideas there. Okay, so like I said, we have the early learning guidelines. So why this is important in curriculum planning is that, like I said, hopefully your goal is to meet these guidelines. These are the things that we're saying preschoolers need to learn about. So when you're planning curriculum, really some people plan an activity and then see what standards or guidelines they're meeting with it. Ideally, you would say, we need to meet this guideline that we haven't met yet, and then come up with an activity to meet that guideline. That's how it should be done. Determine the guideline, and then what are you going to do to meet that guideline? Of course, most activities that you're going to do are going to meet several guidelines. So you could even, print all the guidelines off and have them in your classroom as you're making plans, and highlight or put a check next to each guideline throughout a month or throughout a year, however you do your planning, and as you use it to make sure that all of them are hit at least some point, but I think you'll find that most of them are hit multiple times. But so read this information about the early learning guidelines that I provided you with. And then your authors of the book wrote about the California preschool curriculum framework. And that's what I was just saying that we don't have. But theirs would still be useful. They're still going to have all this information of ideas of how standards could be met. And their guidelines, sorry, I said standards again, their guidelines are going to be which they call foundations, are going to be very similar to ours. So you can still match them and get ideas from their framework. So I've still included this link because it's still going to be a very useful tool to you, even though it's California instead of Oklahoma. So I'm expecting y'all to read this. It's just 9 pages this week. 10 pages, I guess, 10 pages this week. So I expect you to read through these. And then California uses the desired results developmental profile. We in Oklahoma have the early learning index instead. And I provided a link to it up here on another page. So I didn't put the link again here, but the early learning index, I'm very interested to know if that's used at your facility or not. So hopefully in this week's assignment, you'll share that with me. I really don't know how many schools or facilities are currently using this. So I would really like to know. But there's information about that on the Oklahoma State Department of Education website. There is information on getting training for using it. So let me know what's happening out there in the classrooms. I'd love to know. And then there is information about the California one. I left that in this because it's still useful information. And I think some other chapters are going to mention it some, so I wanted you to understand what it was. I think I know some other chapters you're going to because that's what they reference. So those are the 3 main things I wanted to hit on were our guidelines, or if you're school age standards, and the frameworks, which, like I said, even though we don't have them, use California's. It's okay to get ideas from other states. And then the early learning index, which is, I'm sorry, I should have talked about what it is. It's a measurement tool. On the website, it's described as a free comprehensive tool to gauge students' knowledge and skills at the start of the school year and monitor their progress in these areas across the year. And it touches on foundational skills like literacy, mathematics, approaches toward learning, all the things that we have already talked about that are our standards in our guidelines. Sorry, I did provide the link here. There it is. Okay, and then of course, as we are building curriculum, want to make sure that we're meeting each of the domains, which we know we can't hit one at a time. We're not going to just work on language development and that not also be hitting some emotional development, probably some social development. They're all intertwined, aren't they? We're very rarely going to think, well, I need to work on fine motor development and there not be some other skills that are being hit with that. It just naturally happens. So, and that's great because how boring would it be if we just said, no, we're working on fine motor development today. You can't interact with your peers and get some social development. To explain the rest of the chapters of the textbook, here are the Oklahoma concept areas that we just talked about when we were looking at the guidelines and the different chapters of the textbook as they align to them. So when we're in this chapter of the textbook, you'll know that it aligns to our Oklahoma concept areas. So, like I said, I really encourage you to read these 10 pages and also the information that's in your module. So this is your module for the week. I hope you've realized